All right, folks, so I'm told Jamaican farm workers in Canada are disgruntled with the living and working conditions they're faced with. Now, this is the summary of a letter that was sent to the media. However, the Honourable Labour Minister, Karl Samuda, has dismissed any mistreatment. Well, join us to discuss the matter at hand, Organiser of Justice for Migrant Workers, Chris Ramsaroop, and Attorney at Law, Shane Martinez. Good morning, gentlemen. Welcome to Smile Jamaica. Hope you are well.
Good morning.
Okay, let me start with you, Chris. As I just said, we're hearing that things are not so wonderful. And then the minister said he had a tour of a number of farms and everything is hunky-dory. So what's the issue here first? And tell us what you know of what's going on.
Both Shane and I are here to respond to the minister. What the minister said is egregious, it's outrageous. It's not simply about a few bad apples. The entire system is rotten to the core. What happens in Canada when farm workers come up to work here, they're tied to an employer, they do not have any labor and social mobility, and there's a constant threat of being sent home and not being able to return to the program the next year. So workers are subjected to very, very deplorable conditions as a result of the tied permit on one side, but second of all, because of the absence of legislative protections for farm workers in Ontario and across Canada. So to claim that the conditions are fine and that the housing conditions are fine, fly in the face with everything that workers have told us, thousands of workers have told us over the last 20 years.
The minister, unfortunately, not here to defend himself, but he said he toured a number of places and housing is wonderful and he never saw anything like that. Are you suggesting that the minister is being disingenuous?
I think if we look at the academic literature, dozens, if not hundreds of papers, peer-reviewed papers have talked about the conditions and the vulnerabilities associated with workers. We have precedents and decisions from tribunals and from our courts here discussing the precarious nature of workers. So what I'm suggesting is that the minister does not, he wants to protect a program, but he's protecting the program at the expense of the interests of workers and their families that come up to work here in Canada.
All right, thanks for that, Chris. But Shane, what are some of the rights that workers have? And really, if the problem has been this bad for so long, how can it be remedied legally?
So in theory, at least, workers have the same rights in the workplace as Canadians would. Really, the issue comes down to whether or not they're able to enforce those rights. And what we see here in Canada is a system which is comparable in many ways to indentured labor. We have a system that takes the most from these workers, has them doing the most difficult work, and really gives them back the less, while we reap the rewards in Canada from their labor, the fact that they're doing labor that Canadians are unwilling to do themselves. I'll give you some examples of where the rights fall short. Sure. For example, housing, worker housing. In Ontario, migrant farm workers are not protected by the Residential Tenancies Act. What we see is migrant workers oftentimes lodged in deplorable housing. It's not uncommon for there to be fires and other types of structural damage where they live at. We not long ago saw an entire bunkhouse burn down and workers lost everything that they had. We also have a system where employment insurance, they have deductions from their pay made the same way that a Canadian would have deductions made. However, the Canadian government structures the system in such a way that although migrant farm workers from Jamaica pay into the system, into the employment insurance system, they can't collect regular benefits in the off season. We also have a situation where when we look at immigration, we have workers come here from Jamaica that work for 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35 years. Sometimes, and they never have an opportunity to have permanent residence here because the government gives them no pathway to ever become regularized in their status, despite their massive contributions. In addition to that, in Ontario, migrant farm workers are prohibited from unionizing, something which is absolutely offensive to think about. They are prohibited from unionizing, despite the fact that courts and tribunals have acknowledged time and again that they are amongst the most exploited and abused workers in this country. To deny them their power to collectively bargain and organize is a significant move on the part of the provincial government. Yep. In addition to that, we have to look at the fact that migrant workers contend with racist abuse from the police, racist abuse from some employers, as well. And the contracts that they're subjected to have what's called a repatriation clause, which allows them to be sent home at any time for any reason if the employer so chooses to do. So that, again, is a tool that the employer has to make sure that workers comply with demands that are made by the employer and that they don't speak out in defense of themselves.
And what then, Shane, is the legal recourse for any migrant worker who is mistreated or has to endure all of these? Because you outlined a litany of rights violations and just areas of mistreatment. So how can they legally, be compensated or get justice, really?
Mm-hmm. So again, in theory, workers have access to the courts. In theory, workers have access to administrative tribunals. The problem is that when they go to access these systems, it's not uncommon for employers to reprise against them and to say, okay, you want to speak up for yourself, we're going to terminate your employment, we're going to send you back to Jamaica. We're going to send you back to Mexico. We're going to send you back to Trinidad. The issue is with workers not being able to advocate for themselves because of that culture of fear that predominates because of this repatriation clause, the fact that they don't have security and stability here. So oftentimes they have to connect with groups such as Justice for Migrant Workers, which Chris is a prominent organizer in which I've been able to assist with a recent case as well. When workers are able to connect with community organizations, they sometimes have a fighting chance, but we need to have structural and fundamental changes to this system in order to give workers that security and stability that they need to raise their voices and speak out about these abuses.
Yep. Chris, double-barrel question. Are we just talking about Jamaican farm workers, or is the farm work program overall? And having heard what Shane just said, what do you do if they're being mistreated? As it was kind of a question that Garth asked, but are we talking about Jamaicans? And then what do they do?
Jamaica was the first country that signed the agreement with Canada in 1966. So Jamaica has a foundational relationship with Canada through the Seasoned Agricultural Workers Program. It is not, however, simply Jamaican workers that are being exploited. We've seen the similar stories time and again from workers from Trinidad, Barbados, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, Mexico, the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, and the list goes on and on. The three components that we can do, that we can continue to organize and advocate on our side to push for changes. Every day, this story is being national news, both in Canada and in Jamaica, for example. Number two is pressuring your government in Jamaica to take the necessary steps to protect workers, but at the same time, to also point the finger at Canada. What is the High Commissioner of Jamaica doing, the Canadian High Commissioner in Jamaica, for instance, doing to address these issues? So encouraging people in Jamaica to hold the Canadians to account. No worker should come home in a casket. No worker who's healthy should be coming back home maimed or not able to take care of their family because of dangerous working conditions and deadly working conditions in the so-called Great Global North.
By the way, what kind of money are we talking about that these farm workers are getting?
So we're looking at minimum wage. I believe the minimum wage right now is about $15 or $15.20. However, with multiple deductions that workers have to pay for living on the premises, many times for equipment, it is our argument that workers are actually making less than minimum wage.
So it's 15 per hour we're talking about?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, Chris, with all these reports, and to Shane as well, with all the reports that will come across from time to time from workers, them being abused and so on, what happens to those reports? Are they sent even to our Ministry of Labour? What happens, and what's the process for rectifying any of these problems?
So far, both governments, the Canadian government, the Jamaican government, have ignored these calls. Everybody knows, everybody knows about these conditions. In previous time, both prime ministers of the countries have heard, have listened, but have done nothing. They continue to ensure that the agricultural lobby gets its way here in Canada and perpetuates this asymmetrical power imbalance that exists between the employer lobbies and the employer class and workers.
I would just add on to Chris's comments that what we have here is a system where nobody can plead ignorance about this. That this system, as Chris noted, has been in operation since 1966, and it started with Jamaica. And just about as long as it's existed in one form or another, there's been complaints about the dangers that have existed in the workplaces. Workers, as Chris has noted, have been sent home in caskets year after year after year. It's one of the most dangerous types of work that can be done here. And that's why when we have uptown politicians, whether they're here in Canada or in Jamaica, that come out and try to characterize the seasonal agricultural worker program as being humane and as being this great opportunity, that is really nothing short of misleading and offensive. These are not the individuals who are working on the farms. Those determinations about whether this is a fair system are for the workers to make themselves, for them to state how the conditions are on their farms. Unfortunately, a lot of times, again, they make those complaints in private. They don't bring them in court. They don't bring them in tribunals because they're afraid of those reprisals that their employers may make. But the governments, the sending governments of Canada and Jamaica, they know full well what these issues are, and they know that it's long overdue for change. And if the Jamaican government was very serious about trying to improve this, they would demand that the workers themselves have a seat at the table in negotiating these contracts. They would demand that workers from Jamaica have a right to organize in Ontario. They should demand that the workers from Jamaica have all of the securities and protections enforced in Canada that Canadian workers have. And our fight here is against the Canadian government, but workers in Jamaica and their allies, their families, need to raise their voices in solidarity with Jamaican migrant workers and to demand that the Jamaican government make changes as well.
All right, thanks, guys. Hopefully, well, he's already responded, the minister, but hopefully having heard what you guys have said, maybe we'll get another response. So thank you so much. God bless you both, and thanks for being with us this morning. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Organizer of Justice for Migrant Workers, Chris Ramsaroop, and Attorney at Law, Shane Martinez.